Part 28. Newt's eyes fluttered open, and she became aware of her surroundings. She had been cocooned in a pillar-like structure at the edge of a cluster of ovoid shapes. Alien eggs. She recognized them right away. Before they'd been carried off or killed, the last desperate adult colonists had managed to acquire a few for study. But those had all been empty, open at the tops. These were sealed. Somehow the egg nearest her prison became aware of her stirrings. It quivered and then began to open, an obscene flower. Something damp and leathery stirred within. Transfixed by terror, Newt stared as jointed arachnoid legs appeared over the lip of the ovoid. They emerged one at a time. She knew what was going to happen next, and she reacted the only way she could, the only way she knew how. She screamed. Ripley heard, turned towards the sound, and broke into a run. With horrible fascination, Newt watched as the facehugger climbed out of the egg. It paused for a moment on the rim, gathering its strength and taking its bearings. Then it turned towards her. Ripley came pounding into the chamber as it poised to leap. Her finger tensed on the pulse rifle's trigger. The single shell tore the crouching creature apart. The flash from the muzzle illuminated the figure of a mature alien standing nearby. It spun and charged the intruder, just in time for twin bursts from the rifle to catapult it backward. Ripley advanced on the corpse, firing again and again, a murderous expression on her face. The alien jerked onto its back, and she finished it with the flamethrower. While it burned, she ran to Newt. The resinous material of the girl's cocoon hadn't hardened completely yet, and Ripley was able to loosen it enough for Newt to crawl free. "Here." Ripley turned her back to the girl and bent her knees. "Climb aboard." Newt clambered up onto the adult's hips and locked her hands around Ripley's neck. Her voice was weak. "I knew you'd come." "So long as I could still breathe. Okay, we're getting out of here. I want you to hang on, Newt. Hang on real tight. I'm not going to be able to hold you because I've got to be able to use the guns." She didn't see the nod, but she felt it against her back. "I understand. Don't worry. I won't let go." Ripley sensed movement off to their right. She ignored it as she blasted the eggs with the flamethrower. Only then did she turn on the advancing aliens. One almost reached her, a living fireball, and she blew it apart with 2 bursts from the rifle. Ducking beneath a glistening cylindrical mass, she retreated. A piercing shriek filled the air, rising above the pounding of failing machinery, the wail of the emergency siren, and the screech of attacking aliens. She'd have seen it earlier if she'd looked up instead of straight ahead when she'd entered the egg chamber. It was just as well she hadn't, because, despite her determination, she might have faltered. A gigantic silhouette in the ruddy mist, the alien queen glowered above her egg cache like a great, gleaming insectoid Buddha. The fanged skull was horror incarnate. 6 limbs, 2 legs, and 4 taloned arms were folded grotesquely over a distended abdomen. Swollen with eggs, it comprised a vast tubular sac that was suspended from the latticework of pipes and conduits by a web-like membrane, as though an endless coil of intestine had been draped along the supporting machinery. Ripley realized she'd passed right beneath that part of the sac a moment earlier. Inside the abdominal container, countless eggs churned towards a pulsating ovipositor in a vile organic assembly line. There they emerged, glistening and wet, to be picked up by tiny drones. These miniature versions of the alien warriors scuttled back and forth as they attended to the needs of both eggs and queen. They ignored the staring human in their midst as they concentrated with single-minded intensity on the task of transferring newly deposited eggs to a place of safety. Ripley remembered how Vasquez had done it as she pumped the slide on the grenade launcher. Pumped and fired 4 times. The grenades punched deep into the flimsy egg sac and exploded, blowing it to shreds. Eggs and tons of noisome, gelatinous material spilled over the floor of the chamber. The queen went berserk, screeching like a psychotic locomotive. Ripley laid about with the flamethrower, methodically igniting everything in sight as she retreated. Eggs shriveled in the inferno, and the figures of warriors and drones vanished amid frenzied thrashing. The queen towered above the carnage, struggling in the flames. 2 warriors closed in on Ripley. The pulse rifle clicked empty. Smoothly, she ejected the magazine, slammed another one home, and held the trigger down. Her attackers vanished in the homicidal hail of fire. It didn't matter if it moved or not. She blasted everything that didn't look wholly mechanical as she ran for the elevator, setting fire to equipment and destroying controls and instrumentation together with attacking aliens. Sweat and steam half blinded her, but the flares she dropped earlier to mark her path shone brightly, jewels set among the devastation. Sirens howled around her, and the station rocked with internal convulsions. She almost ran past one flare, skidded to a halt, and turned towards it. She staggered on as if in a dream, her lungs straining no longer. Her body was so pumped up, she felt as though she were flying across the metal floor. Behind her, the queen detached from the ruined egg sac, ripping it away from her abdomen. Rising on legs the size of temple pillars, she lumbered forward, crushing machinery, cocoons, drones, and anything else in her path. Ripley used the flamethrower to sterilize the corridor ahead, letting loose incinerating blasts at regular intervals, firing down side corridors before she crossed them to keep from being surprised. By the time she and Newt reached the freight elevator, the weapons tank was empty. The elevator she'd used for the descent had been demolished by falling debris. She hit the call button on its companion and was rewarded by the whine of a healthy motor as the second metal cage commenced its slow fall from the upper levels. An enraged shriek made her turn. A distant glistening shape like a runaway crane was trying to batter its way through intervening pipes and conduits to reach them. The queen's skull scraped the ceiling. She checked the pulse rifle. The magazine was empty, and she was out of refills, having spent shells profligately while rescuing Newt. No more grenades either. She tossed the useless dual weapon aside, glad to be rid of the weight. The cage's descent was too slow. There was a service ladder set inside the wall next to the twin elevator shafts, and she scrambled up the first rungs. Newt was as light as a feather on her back. As she dove into the stairwell, a powerful black arm shot through the doorway like a piston. Razor-sharp talons slammed into the floor, centimeters from her legs, digging into the metal. Which way now? She was no longer fearful, had no time to panic. Too many other things to concentrate on. She was too busy to be terrified. There, an open stairwell leading to the station's upper levels. It rocked and shuddered as the huge installation began tearing itself to bits beneath her. Behind her, the floor buckled as something incredibly powerful threw itself insanely against the metal wall. Talons and jaws pierced the thick alloy plates. You now have 2 minutes to reach minimum safe distance. The sad voice of the station informed any who might be listening. Ripley fell, banging one knee against the metal stairs. Pain forced her to pause. As she caught her breath, the sound of the elevator motors starting up made her look back down through the open latticework of the building. The elevator cage had begun to ascend. She could hear the overloaded cables groaning in the open shaft. She resumed her heavenward flight, the stairwell becoming a mad blur around her. There was only one reason why the elevator would resume its ascent. At last they reached the doorway that led out onto the upper-level landing platform. With Newt somehow still clinging to her, Ripley slammed the door open and stumbled out into the wind and smoke. The dropship was gone. "Bishop!" The wind carried her scream away as she scanned the sky. "Bishop!" Newt sobbed against her back. A whine made her turn as the straining elevator slowly rose into view. She backed away from the door until she was leaning against the narrow railing that encircled the landing platform. It was 10 levels to the hard ground below. The skin of the heaving processing station was as smooth as glass. They couldn't go up and they couldn't go down. They couldn't even dive into an air duct. The platform shook as an explosion ripped through the bowels of the station. Metal beams buckled, nearly throwing her off her feet. With a shriek of rending steel, a nearby cooling tower collapsed, keeling over like a slain sequoia. The explosions didn't stop after the first one this time. They began to sequence as backup safety systems failed to contain the expanding reaction. On the other side of the doorway, the elevator ground to a halt. The safety cage enclosing the cargo bay began to part. She whispered to Newt, "Close your eyes, baby." The girl nodded solemnly, knowing what Ripley intended as she put one leg over the railing. They would hit the ground together, quick and clean. She was just about to step off into open air when the dropship rose into view almost beneath them, its hovering thrusters roaring. She hadn't heard it approach because of the howling wind. The ship's loading boom was extended, a single long metal strut reaching towards them like the finger of God. How Bishop held the vessel steady in the rippling gale, Ripley didn't know and didn't care. Behind her, she could just hear the voice of the station. It, like the installation it served, had almost run out of time. You now have 30 seconds to reach minimum. She jumped onto the loading boom and hung on as it retracted into the dropship's cargo bay. An instant later, a tremendous explosion tore through the station. The resultant wind shear slammed the hovering craft sideways. Extended landing legs ripped into a complex of platform, wall, and conduit. Metal squealed against metal, the entanglement threatening to drag the ship downward. Inside the hold, Ripley threw herself into a flight seat, cradling Newt against her as she strapped both of them in. Glancing up the aisle, she could just see into the cockpit where Bishop was fighting the controls. As they retracted, the sound of the landing legs pulling free echoed through the little vessel. She slammed home the latches on her seat harness, wrapped both arms tightly around Newt. "Punch it, Bishop!" The entire lower level of the station vanished in an expanding fireball. The ground heaved, earth and metal vaporizing as the dropship erupted skyward. Its engines fired hard, and the resultant G's slammed Ripley and Newt back into their seat. No comfortable gradual climb to orbit this time. Bishop had the engines open full throttle as the dropship clawed its way through the blighted atmosphere. Ripley's back protested, even as she mentally urged Bishop to increase the velocity. As they left blue for black, the clouds lit up from beneath. A bubble of white-hot gas burst through the troposphere. The shockwave from the thermonuclear explosion rattled the ship, but didn't damage it, as they continued to climb towards high orbit. Within the metal bottle, Ripley and Newt stared out a viewport, watching as the blinding flare dissipated behind them. Then Newt slumped against Ripley's shoulder and began to cry quietly. Ripley rocked her and stroked her hair. "It's okay, baby. We made it. It's over." Ahead of them, the great ungainly bulk of the Sulaco hung in geosynchronous orbit, awaiting the arrival of its smaller offspring. On Bishop's command, the dropship rose until docking grapples snapped home, lifting them into the cargo bay. The outer lock doors cycled shut. Automatic warning lights swept the dark, deserted chamber, and a warning horn ceased hooting. Excess engine heat was vented as the cavernous hold filled with air. Within the ship, Bishop stood behind Ripley while she knelt beside the comatose Hicks. She glanced questioningly at the android. "I gave him another shot for the pain. He kept insisting that he didn't need it, but he didn't fight the injection. Strange thing, Pain. Stranger to me still, this peculiar inner need of certain types of humans to pretend it doesn't exist. Many other times I'm glad I'm synthetic." "We need to get him to the Sulaco's medical ward," she replied, rising. "If you can get his arms, I'll take his feet." Bishop smiled. "He's resting comfortably now. It will be better for him if we jostle him as little as possible. And you are tired. For that matter, I'm tired. It'll be easier if we get a stretcher." Ripley hesitated, looking down at Hicks, then nodded. "You're right, of course." Picking up Newt, she preceded the android down the aisle, leading to the extended loading ramp. They could have a self-propelling stretcher back for Hicks in a few minutes. Bishop continued to talk. "I'm sorry if I gave you a scare when you emerged onto the landing platform and saw the ship missing, but the site had simply become too unstable. I was afraid I'd lose the ship if I remained docked. It was simpler and safer to hover a short distance away. Close to the ground, the wind is not as strong. I had a monitor on the exit all the time so I'd know when you arrived." "Wish I'd known that at the time." "I know. I had to circle and hope that things didn't get too rough to take you off. In the absence of human direction, I had to use my own judgment according to my programming. I'm sorry if I didn't handle it the best way." They were halfway down the loading ramp. She paused and put a hand on his shoulder, stared evenly into the artificial eyes. "You did okay, Bishop." "Well, thanks, He stopped in mid-sentence, his attention focused on something glimpsed out of the corner of one eye. Nothing, really. An innocuous drop of liquid had splashed onto the ramp next to his shoe. Condensate from the skin of the dropship. The droplet began to hiss as it started to eat into the metal ramp. Acid. Something sharp and glistening burst from the center of his chest, spraying Ripley with milky android internal fluid. An alien stinger, queen size, driving straight through him from behind. Bishop thrashed, uttering meaningless machine noises and clutching the protruding point of the spear as it slowly lifted him off the landing ramp. The Queen had concealed herself among the landing mechanism inside one strut bay. The atmospheric plates that normally sealed the bay flush with the rest of the dropship's skin had been bent aside or ripped away. She'd blended in perfectly with the rest of the heavy machinery until she began to emerge. Seizing Bishop in two huge hands, she ripped him apart and flung the two halves aside. Rotating warning lights flashed on her shining dark limbs as she slowly descended to the deck, still smoking where Ripley had half fried her. Acid dripped from minor wounds that were healing rapidly. Sextuple limbs unfolded in inhuman geometries. Breaking out of her paralysis, Ripley lowered Newt to the deck without taking her eyes off the descending nightmare. Go! Newt bolted for the nearest cluster of packing crates and equipment. The alien dropped to the deck and pivoted in the direction of the movement. Ripley backed clear, waving her arms and shouting, making faces, jumping up and down, doing anything and everything she could think of to draw the monster's attention away from the fleeing child. Her decoying action was successful. The giant whirled, moving much too quickly for anything so huge, and sprang as Ripley sprinted for the oversized internal storage door that dominated the far end of the cargo hold. Massive feet boomed on the deck behind her. She cleared the door and flailed at the close switch. The barrier whirred as it complied with the command, moving much faster than the doors of the now vanished station. An echoing whang reverberated through the storage room as the alien struck the solid wall an instant too late. Ripley didn't have time to stand around and see if the door would hold. She moved rapidly among bulky, dark shapes, searching for a particular one. Outside, the Queen's attention was drawn from the stubborn barrier to visible movement. A network of trench-like service tunnels protected by heavy metal grillwork underlaid the cargo bay deck like the tributaries of a river system. The channels were just deep enough for Newt to enter. She'd dropped through one service opening and had begun crawling, scurrying towards the other end of the cargo bay like a burrowing rabbit. The alien tracked the movement. Talons swooped, ripped up a section of grillwork just behind the frantic child. Newt tried to move faster, scrambling desperately as another piece of grill disappeared right at her heels. The next to go would be directly above her. The alien paused in mid-reach at the sound of the heavy storage room door grinding open behind her. In the opening stood a massive, articulated silhouette. Riding 2 tons of hardened steel, Ripley strode out in the power loader. Her hands were inside Waldo gloves, while her feet rested in similar receptacles attached to the floor controls of the safety cab. Wearing the loader like high-tech armor, she advanced on the watching Queen. The loader's ponderous feet boomed against the deck plates. Ripley's face was a mask of maternal fury, devoid of fear. "Get away from her, you bitch!" The Queen emitted an inhuman screech and leapt at the oncoming machine. Ripley threw her arm in a movement not normally associated with the activities of power loaders or similar devices, but the elegant machine reacted perfectly. One massive hydraulic arm slammed into the alien's skull and threw it back against the wall. The Queen reacted instantly and charged again, only to crash into a backhand that literally landed like a ton. She fell backward into a pile of heavy loading equipment. "Come on!" Ripley wore a frenzied, distorted smile. "Come on!" Tail lashing with rage, the Queen charged the loader a third time. 4 biomechanical arms swung at the loaders too. The great stinger stabbed at the flanks and underside of the loader, glancing harmlessly off solid metal. Ripley parried and struck with sweeping blows of the steel tines, backing up the loader, then advancing, pivoting to keep the machine's arms between her and the Queen. The battle moved across the deck, demolishing packing crates, portable instrumentation, small machinery, everything in the path of the fight. The cargo bay echoed with the nightmarish sounds of 2 dragons battling to the death. Getting the 2 powerful mechanical hands around a pair of alien arms, Ripley clenched her own fingers tight inside the Waldos, crushing both biomechanical limbs. The Queen writhed with outrage, the talons of her other hands coming within inches of penetrating the safety cage to tear the tiny human apart. Ripley raised her arms, lifting the Queen off the deck. The loader's engine groaned as it protested against the excessive weight. Hind legs ripped at the machine, denting the safety cage protecting its operator. The alien skull inclined towards her, and the outer jaws began to part. Ripley clung grimly to her controls. The inner striking teeth exploded towards her. She ducked, and they slammed into the seat cushion behind her in an explosion of gelatinous drool. Yellow acid foamed over the hydraulic arms, crawling towards the safety cage. The Queen tore at the high-pressure hoses. Purple fluid sprayed in all directions, machine blood mixing with alien blood. As it lost hydraulic pressure on one side, the loader crumpled and fell over. The Queen immediately rolled to get on top of it, avoiding the crushing metal arms, trying to find a way to penetrate the safety cage. Ripley hit a switch on the loader's console, and its cutting torch came to life, the intense blue flame firing straight into the alien's face. It screamed and drew back, dragging the loader with it. As she fell and the world was turned upside down around her, Ripley's safety harness kept her secured to the driver's seat. Together, machine, biomechanoid, and human rolled into the rectangular pit of the loading dock. The loader landed on top of the alien, crushing part of its torso and pinning it beneath its great weight. Acid began to seep in a steady flow from the badly damaged body. Ripley's eyes widened as she fought with the loader's controls. The dripping acid spread out over the airlock doors and began to smoke as it started eating its way through the super-strong alloy. Beyond the outer lock lay void. As the first tiny holes appeared, she struggled to unstrap herself from the driver's seat. Air began to leave the Sulaco as the insatiable emptiness of space sucked at the ship. A rising wind tore at Ripley as she stumbled clear of the loader. Jumping a puddle of smoking acid, she grabbed at the bottom rungs of the ladder that was built into the wall of the airlock. One hand slapped the inner door's emergency override. Above, the heavy inner airlock doors began rumbling towards each other like steel jaws. She climbed wildly. Beneath her, the first holes widened, were joined by others as the acid did its work. The flow of escaping air around her increased in volume, slowing her ascent. Newt had emerged from the network of subfloor channels to hide among a forest of gas cylinders. When the power loader, Ripley, and the alien had tumbled into the airlock, she'd slipped out for a better look. Now the suction from below pulled her legs out from under her and dragged her, kicking and screaming, across the smooth deck. Bishop, or rather his upper half, saw her coming. He grabbed a support stanchion with one hand. With the other, he reached out, and thanks to perfect synthetic timing, just managed to get his fingers entwined in the girl's belt as she slid by. She hung there in his grasp, floating in the intensifying gale like a Newt flag as the wind sucked at her. Ripley's head emerged above deck level. As she tried to kick up and out with her right leg, something caressed her left ankle and latched hold. An experimental tug almost tore Ripley's arms from their sockets. Desperately, she threw both arms around the ladder's upper rung, which was mounted a foot away on the deck. The inner airlock doors continued rumbling towards one another. If she didn't pull herself clear or drop back down within a couple of seconds, she'd end up looking just like Bishop. Below, the acid-weakened outer lock doors groaned. A portion of the inner reinforcing collapsed. The interlocked power loader and alien queen settled a few centimeters. Ripley felt her arms giving way as she was dragged down, but it was her shoe that came away first. Her leg was free. Summoning strength from unknown depths, she dragged herself onto the deck just as the inner airlock doors slammed shut. Beneath her, the alien queen uttered another scream of rage and exerted all her incomprehensible strength. The heavy loader squealed as she began to push it aside. It was halfway off when the outer doors, honeycombed by acid, fell apart, sending chunks of metal, bubbles of acid, the queen, and the power loader spilling out into space. Ripley rose and stumbled to the nearest viewport. The Queen's efforts were enough to propel her clear of the Sulaco's artificial gravity field. Still screaming and tearing at the power loader, the Queen tumbled slowly back towards the inhospitable world she'd recently fled. Ripley stared as her nemesis faded to a dot, then a dim point, and was at last swallowed by the rolling clouds. Within the cargo bay, turbulent air eddied and settled as the Sulaco's cyclers worked to replenish the atmosphere that had been lost. Bishop was still holding Newt with one hand. His bisected torso trailed artificial inner organs and sparking conduits. His eyelids fluttered, and his head sometimes jerked unpredictably, bumping against the deck. His internal regulators had managed to shut off the flow of android blood, fighting a holding action against the massive injury. White encrustations sparkled along the edges of the tear. He managed a small, grim smile as he eyed the approaching Ripley. "Not bad for a human." He regained control of his eyelids long enough to give her an unmistakable wink. Ripley stumbled over to Newt. The girl looked dazed. "Mommy! Mommy!" "Right here, baby. I'm right here." Sweeping the girl up in her arms, she hugged her as hard as she could. Then she headed towards the Sulaco's crew quarters. Around them, the big ship's systems hummed reassuringly. She found her way up to medical and returned to the cargo hold with a stretcher in tow. Bishop assured her that he could wait. With the stretcher's aid, she gently loaded the sleeping Hicks and trundled him back to the hospital ward. His expression was peaceful, content. He'd missed the whole thing, luxuriating in the effects of the injection Bishop had given him. As for the android, he lay on the deck, his hands crossed over his chest and his eyes closed. She couldn't tell if he was dead or sleeping. Better minds than hers would determine that once they got back to Earth. In sleep, Hicks's face lost much of its macho marine toughness. He looked much like any other man. Handsomer, though, and certainly more tired. Except that he wasn't like any other man. If it hadn't been for him, she'd be dead. Newt would be dead. All dead. Only the Sulaco would have lived on, an empty receptacle awaiting the return of humans who would never come. She thought of waking him, decided against it. In a little while, when she was sure that his vital signs were stabilized and the repairs to his acid-scarred flesh were well underway, she'd place him in one of the empty, waiting hypersleep capsules. She turned to inspect the sleeping chamber. 3 capsules to prep. If he still lived, Bishop wouldn't need one. The synthetic would probably have found hypersleep confining. Newt looked up at her. She held 2 of Ripley's fingers as they strode together up the corridor. "Are we going to sleep now?" "That's right, Newt." "Can we dream?" Ripley gazed down at the bright, upturned face and smiled. "Yes, honey, I think we both can."